Welcome to Teaching Methods. Now that you've gone through basic shooting technique, it is time to learn how to teach the method to your students. There are three parts to this section. First, we will cover some general coaching principles. Then we'll look at coaching priorities. And finally, you'll learn how to teach NTS to new students. Let's start with some general coaching principles. Safety is our number one concern. As you run your program, it is important to remember that safety cannot be stressed or relearned enough. By enforcing safety rules consistently and integrating safety into all of your lessons, you create a safe environment for your students and teach them to be disciplined and responsible. It is also important to remember that you are coaching athletes and not other coaches. Archery is an especially technical sport, so it is crucial that you gauge how much information your athletes need and can handle at any one point in time. As you grow as a coach and learn more, that knowledge should be coupled with wisdom so that you are teaching effectively and not overwhelming your students. To help with this, remember to focus on concepts, not details. There are a lot of tiny components to archery, like proper finger pressure on the string, breathing, and so on, but it is the fundamental concepts like holding that must be learned before focusing on details. Likewise, remember that each student is unique and must practice a shot that is comfortable for them. However, the underlying concepts remain the same in each archer. Know your students and prioritize. When starting out, most class lessons will likely be the same for all of your students. However, as your students grow in archery, they will excel and struggle with different things. So you should know how they are progressing and prioritize what their focus should be on. Again, it is essential to not overwhelm your students, but rather identify what is most important for them to practice and give them a manageable amount. For example, during each practice, give your students 2 to 3 specific things to work on and the drills to help them. Once they have accomplished those, you can replace them with the next set of items to practice. Lastly, when students are first learning archery, your role as a coach is to mold them and act as a visual reference. As students grow in maturity and interest in the sport, then you can explain the concepts in more detail. However, when starting out, it is more important for them to first practice the motions of archery to begin building a sense of body awareness. A helpful way to think about this is how you would teach a 6-year-old. You would do so with as little talking as possible and rather help them through the motions. On this note, it is important to remember to be appropriate in your interactions with your students. For example, to help keep a student's shoulder down, be sure to tell them first that you are going to place only 2 fingers on their shoulder to keep it down. When you have a new skill you want to teach, remember these 5 steps. Introduce, explain, demonstrate, practice, and evaluate. These steps will help keep your lessons organized and productive. Provide honest and respectful feedback. It is important to identify both what students are doing correctly as well as what they need to improve upon. This way, students will continue to reinforce what they are doing properly in addition to working on new things. Lastly, stay positive and encouraging. Archery should be fun. Be creative with your teaching so that lessons can be both productive and enjoyable. As we go into the teaching section, it is important to know what your priorities are as you instruct. At this point in your archery education, you have 4 main priorities. These include safety, holding, and finally stance and posture. It is important to keep these in mind as you teach so that you can quickly identify what needs to be worked on first. Having these priorities does not mean that these are the only things that you teach. Rather, they will help keep you focused on the main concepts and help your archers know what is most crucial for them to practice. For example, if an archer has an inconsistent release and is not getting to the holding position, the first thing to work on would be holding. As the archer practices, you may also mold their grip into a better position or fix their head position, but the archer is consciously focusing on getting to holding. Let's go into teaching NTS now. The first thing you want to teach is safety. When going over range rules and safety, make sure your students are paying attention. A good way to do this is to keep them involved with questions. For example, ask them, how can we be safe and responsible on the archery range? Then you can build upon their answers to make sure all of the safety rules are covered. Next, let's do the eye dominance test so that students know which way they will be shooting, left or right-handed. Students should go by their dominant hand, but keep an eye out for any cross-dominance cases. Before starting your activities, have your students go through several warm-ups like jumping jacks or stretch band practice, and then do some stretches like arm circles, arm over, arms behind, leg stretches, neck stretches, arm behind the head, wrists, side stretches, leg up, etc. The next lesson is on holding. First, demonstrate what holding is with one student. Use the squeeze drill to show that being in line is stronger than being out of line. Thus, it is important to reach this holding position when shooting. Then have the students break up into groups of 3 to practice holding using the squeeze drill. It is helpful to label them as 1, 2, and 3, and have the 1s go first, then the 2s, and finally the 3s. At this point, you can also go around to each group to help mold them to the right position. This is also a chance to correct general posture like keeping the shoulders down and making sure they are centered over their feet. By teaching holding from the very beginning, your students will be equipped with the most important concept of NTS. They will be able to use the other steps of NTS to reach the feeling and concept of holding that they have already learned. Another skill you want to teach early on is how to rotate their bow arm to the proper position. You can practice this by having them touch their chest and then extend their arm, which puts their elbow into the proper position. They can also grab a door frame or other stationary object to practice rotating their bow arm. Now you can go into the steps of NTS. You want to do this first with the form strap or just an air bow. This is so that your students can get comfortable with the motions without any tension. So begin by having your students line up along the waiting line. This is a good opportunity to assign your students to a target, which will help keep things organized later. Now you will walk through each step by naming the step, demonstrating it, and having your students follow along. Again, very little explanation is needed at this point. You just want your students to learn the name of each step and mimic the position of each one. The first step is stance. Have each student place one foot on either side of the line, shoulder width apart, and parallel. This is known as a square stance. The next step is posture. Make sure everyone has good posture and is not slouching or leaning. Again, the 3 steps to good posture are to tuck the hips under, lower the chest, and settle your weight down into your hips. Next is set. Demonstrate yourself the set position and have your students mimic it. Next is setup. Load, anchor, transfer. The archers have now taken holding. Lastly is release and follow through. After you have repeated this process of saying the steps and having the students mimic the position, you can have the students call out each step as they go through the motions. This helps reinforce the steps in their mind. It also gives you the chance to go to each of the students to help mold them to the correct positions as they go through the shot cycle. Once again, the steps of NTS are stance and posture, set, set up, load, anchor, transfer, holding, release, and follow through. Now that your students have practiced the steps of NTS, you can introduce the stretch band. This gives the students some tension to work with. It is also an opportunity to practice the range commands. Here you can see the students following the range commands and coming out to the shooting line. Then the coach is calling out the steps as students follow along. As your students are going through the shot cycle, you can call out each step, check on them, and mold your students as needed. Here the coach is helping a student adjust their stance. Here the coach is molding the archer to the correct set position. And here he is helping to correct a high bow shoulder. further reinforce the NTS steps, another good activity is to group the students into pairs. You can go through the students and designate half as ones and the others as twos. First, the ones will go through the shot cycle, while the twos call out each step. When the ones reach holding, the twos will do the squeeze drill on them. You can also have them continue to release and follow through. After all of the ones have completed this, then they switch, and the twos do the shot cycle, while the ones call out each step. During this, you can go around to each pair to help.
Set up, load, anchor, transfer, holding, the squeeze drill. Good job.
While students have their stretch band, you can also have them all do the alignment drill to help them practice the proper bow arm position. You can also have the students do some drills from the common errors section we saw earlier, such as the release and bow arm drill. After completing these pre-shooting activities, your students are now ready to start practicing with the bow. First, teach them about proper equipment use. This includes no dry fires, no high draws, keeping arrows in their quivers, how to nock their arrow, and proper grip and hook. Then you can start assigning equipment to your students. This process includes handing out arm guards and finger tabs, checking arrow length, and assigning the proper bows. Finally, review range rules and range commands. The students should start shooting at a close distance of around 7 meters. As their skill improves, you can gradually increase the distance. Now it's time for your students to take their first shots. Have your students get their equipment and line up along the waiting line. After 2 whistle blasts or clear command, students may come up to the shooting line. Make sure students don't take out their arrows until they hear the command to begin. This is also a good opportunity to remind them to do their stance. Once you give the single whistle blast or the begin shooting command, students may take out their arrow and begin shooting. For the first couple of arrows, it is a good idea to call out the steps for them so that they're not forgetting to do each of them with the bow. Here you can see set, set up, load, anchor, transfer and holding, release and follow through. As students finish, they should go back behind the waiting line and put their bows back on the rack. Finally, after 3 whistles or the clear command, students may walk to the target and retrieve their arrows. During their first time retrieving arrows, be sure to remind them to walk and stop at the target line, and then go one at a time up to the target. Also review the 4 steps to pulling arrows. One hand on the target, other hand at the base of the arrow, check behind that it is clear, and then pull out slowly. Once the arrows are pulled, they should keep them in their quivers and walk back behind the waiting line. Once your students are comfortable with the shooting routine, you can go around and give more individual form attention, and incorporate the drills from the common errors section earlier. Match the command on the right to its meaning on the left. That's correct. You have now finished Section 7, Teaching Methods. Click here to go on to Section 8 on Competition Basics.